buddy?
Hi, Dr. J. I'm very happy to be here. And actually, what you didn't tell people is that you and I took how many hours drive? We did a long drive, a 10-hour drive across the southwestern U.S. from New Mexico to Los Angeles.
It was actually
Phoenix.
Yeah, Heber or whatever little city in the tiny mountains.
Right.
Yeah, from Travis Walton's event, and that was kind of funny, you know. And you're right. From Phoenix, it would have been easier, but no, we had the 2 hours of windiness, down that little tiny road.
That's right. Yes.
I remember going up there. I got a little warning actually from the police department. You know, they didn't give me a speeding ticket, but this is the first time in my life you get a written warning. Here in Los Angeles, doesn't happen. Nonetheless, I am so glad I've had you on because we have been talking about the subject of false flags for about a year without talking to them on air. Now, UFOs and National Security State has been the book that was your first that really woke everybody up. And I have all your books ranging from that to the volume 2 to UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, AD After Disclosure, not to mention a handful of books of the people whom you published. And so let's just first start with what Peter Robbins was saying this past Wednesday when he was here live, when you guys were in Athens, which is probably going to be an annual event. You were there at the beginning. What did you experience? What kind of event was it? And who else was there?
This was a fascinating event for me. I'd never been to Greece, first of all, so I have a lifelong fascination with ancient history, ancient Greek history, very much so. So that was great, and I was lucky. Peter and I had a fantastic host, and actually a series of hosts who took us around, and we saw a lot of great archaeological sites, including Delphi. And a lot of other places that were wonderful. The event itself was organized by an organization called Contact with Space. They are Reichians. They are followers of the great and misunderstood and really almost forgotten scientist Wilhelm Reich, who was originally a student of Sigmund Freud back in the early 20th century. But Reich developed his own ideas, fascinating ideas. And in addition to that, was very interested in the UFO subject. But I think it's Reich's philosophy that has gotten a lot of traction among these individuals in Greece. Peter has been a Reich student for many, many years, so they brought him over and they learned about me. They wanted me to speak. So that's what brought me there. I gave several lectures on kind of a fundamental background of the UFO subject for a lot of people who are not familiar with it. And I do think that they will have an annual event, or at least they'll do as much as they can to bring people back. It already looks like we're going to have something going on next year, and I've understood that they will want me back, so I'll be happy to go. It's Greece.
Exactly. Greece it's no secret. Everybody knows that's where my family originates. I have most of my family still there. And this year, 2016, happens to be the first year out of 32 years of studying this intensely that I found out that there was an event. Now, prior to you and Peter coming on, back in April, I had Eric von Daniken on, and he had just come back from speaking in Greece, but it wasn't in Athens, it was in Delphi. But then again, think about it. Aside from the 3,200 islands, and it is exactly 3,200, it was 3,199 until the Turks finally gave back a Greek island.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
3,200
islands.
That's
a lot of islands.
It really is, but some are literally the size of, where you could put a little home and that's it,
Right.
And there's some are so close that you could have children swim back and forth and do laps. That's what people do. But nonetheless, to navigate around that country is, if you're on the mainland, as you were in Athens, it doesn't take you that long. We're talking, at the most 6 hours to reach any border. So think about that, everybody out there listening, especially the listeners in Greece right now, because here, Los Angeles County has more people than Greece. Greece is only about 10 million people, and when you think about that in terms of scale, that's a very small country. And
close to half of them are in the Athens area, I learned. That's what I discovered. Right. Athens is a great city. I don't want to, I know we have a lot of things we want to talk about, but I will just say this. Greece, I had had a long time love affair with ancient Greece history, but I did not. And I'd been studying Greek politics, particularly the robbery that's going on of that country by private banks right now.
Yes.
This is criminal, absolutely criminal. And the betrayal of that country by the Cyprus government, the Syriza party, which I think just shocked everyone when they went totally against the Grexit vote about a year ago, and much more than the Brexit of Britain, which had 52%. The Greeks had more than 60% voted to leave the EU, and the government, which had said, we're with you, suddenly did a right about face the next day. And what I found, I had a lot of conversations, political conversations with Greeks about this. I was fascinated by it. And I think there's almost like this national depression that has set in. It's really heartbreaking to see this. But I still believe that the Greek people, they've sold their country to the banks for the next 99 years. Literally, that's what it is. All the airports, all the ports, everything that's worth owning is being owned by foreign banks. This is terrible. You have unemployment among young people of something like 66%. There's just almost a situation of no hope. And you have to think, like with friends like this, who needs enemies? This is exactly what's happened to poor Greece. But I do believe that at some point there will have to be a will within the country to resist what is happening to them. This is unconscionable criminality. It's happening in a number of places in the world. Ukraine is another example of banks, major corporations, Monsanto going into Ukraine and just taking over. This is horrible. But with Greece, it's a truly, truly tragic story from the nation that gave us tragedy hundreds and hundreds of centuries, thousands of years ago. They're having their own tragedy now. But I do believe in the Greek people, and I believe that the day will come when they resist this. And what they really need to do, in my opinion, is something along the lines of what Iceland did, which is lock up the bankers and just say no to this debt. They have to say no at some point. But that's for the future.
That is absolutely right. And everybody, especially in our family and every other Greek we know, has regretted joining the EU. And I don't know if you know this fact, but of course, the banks, the private banks, are threatening everything against them. But Germany, in particular, one of their banks, wants to take the Acropolis as payment, and
right.
a number of islands, which is just sort of ludicrous. So you're right. Things have to change, and they will change. The Depression actually started right after the 2004 Olympic Games because they spent so much to, rebuild the city for the, Olympic Village and everything.
Any country that is offered an Olympics, the proper response is to turn around and run far and fast. Don't host Olympics. It's just ruinous, absolutely ruinous. It's happened to Brazil. It's happening to every country, and not just Olympics, but like the soccer tournaments, all of these, because they come in and it's just they completely turn the local community upside down, and the people don't get anything out of it.
I agree. This whole world is in turmoil. 2016, everybody, I want you to remember this. Every time we have an election year, remember, it is also a global year with regards to the Summer Olympics, and it happens to fall on a leap year. Now, a lot of people have been talking about Obama being the disclosure president. I've been hearing this story since 2007 when he first started campaigning, let alone when he first won. Why would he, in the final months of his lame duck presidency, have disclosure? And, let me add my own little piece to this.
Sure.
How can he even disclose when I don't think he knows anything? First of all, I have family, nuclear family, that's both one in private military corporations and another is a FBI agent, practicing FBI agents, special agents they call them. The point is, who do you think of the two has more access to weapons, intelligence, etc.?
Good question. Well, I have a couple of answers. So first of all, the president, you're right. I mean, the president's job is to kiss the babies, talk to the foreign diplomats, get in front of the camera, read the lines, read the script that's given to the president. And, when you think of all of the special access programs, the black budget programs that exist, there's hundreds, probably maybe thousands. No one really knows. It is literally impossible for any one person to stay on top of what's going on. So if we think of something as clandestine as the UFO phenomenon, and it is buried within the bowels of the national security community and also, I think, private contractors that are associated with it, all of this is on a deep need-to-know basis. And, There's differing opinions on how much does a president know, but I am of the opinion that the president is told what he or she, and if it happens in the future, will need to know to do their job. They are caretakers, they're sales reps for brand America, for brand global, and they go in for a certain purpose. Barack Obama did a great job because he promoted brand America to the global community very effectively, and in fact was able to push the agenda for neoliberal globalization and also the American neoconservative empire project. He did it very, very well. And he did it by sounding a little smarter than the previous guy in office, and people like him. He's got good publicity overall, even now. So he did his job. And that's really what the president does. So do they truly know about UFOs? And my opinion is different from that of my friend and colleague Grant Cameron, who has a different take on it, and Stephen Bass.
UFO.com, right?
Grant and Stephen have different takes on this, but my opinion is that the president is here and he's gone, and we have what's called the deep state, and they are there forever. So, but that wouldn't stop, in theory, a disclosure from the White House. Even now, it simply wouldn't be initiated by the president. It would be decided. President will be told, okay, you're going to do a disclosure. Here's your information. This is what you give. I've been thinking a lot of fresh thoughts about disclosure over the last year because there's just been so much talk about it, and it's forced me to think through things. I'm not of the opinion, as Stephen is and as Grant, I think, is, that Barack Obama will do a disclosure before the end of his presidency. I just don't believe it. Their logic is different. And just to be fair to them, and if you've had them on and you know, but their logic essentially is that the Hillary Clinton candidacy is pushing this to such a degree, in their opinion, that Barack Obama will not want to be left out of the mix, and that if it's going to happen, he's going to be the guy to do it. That's fundamentally their take on it. I differ because I don't think that the Hillary Clinton campaign is going to have any interest in doing a disclosure. I don't care how interested John Podesta is in UFOs. That's Hillary's campaign manager. Yes, he's interested, but there are larger issues at stake here. A true disclosure, pardon me, I'm about to cough. Excuse me. A true disclosure of UFOs comes with a huge amount of baggage behind it, as we all know. And if the president were to say that the UFO phenomenon is real, he can't just walk away from the podium and just put his hands together and hope everything turns out well. He's got a lot of follow-up questions like, oh, really? So does that mean the government has been hiding the truth for the last 70 years or so? Oh, really? Does that mean that there are aliens that are here? Does that mean that abductions are real? Does that mean that there's a black budget UFO program? All of these are going to come out. It's inevitable. So it's a huge, huge issue. Now, the other side of it could be that these people are aware that the UFO phenomenon is indeed impossible to keep under wraps forever. And I agree with this. I think it is impossible to keep under wraps forever. But the question remains, is now the time that they're going to unload this to the rest of the world? I think if there is any kind of disclosure, I would actually be afraid of a disclosure in the sense that if it comes from the White House, from the United States, which is the leading proponent of injustice and death and misery to the world, and yes, it is, despite the propaganda, that's the case, and it is the leading driver of the lurch toward global fascism, as we're seeing it, global totalitarianism. It's the U.S. is pushing it. So that if there were to be a disclosure of this reality, my fear is that it would be used it would be spun in such a way to generate just enough fear among the public to justify greater centralized control over the population. In other words, think of it this way. There's 70 plus years, I have to think, 70 years of data that has been amassed on this subject. How hard do you think it would be for them to take a sliver of the genuine data, spin it, package it in such a way that it would be truth, it would be a partial truth, but it would be enough truth to convince people, oh, wow, this is real, and enough truth to convince people that they need to now go to the government for additional protection and, just finalize the clamping down of any last vestige of individual rights. That is my fear from a White House initiated disclosure. I recently did an interview, it got out on YouTube, and I made an offhand comment, but I actually agree with my offhand comment, which was that I said I'm actually rooting for either Putin or the Chinese to do a disclosure, because I think that would actually be better for the world. And it was headlined, Richard Dolan says, promotes Putin's disclosure over Obama, or something like that. But that got attention. But I actually think, when I look at all of these factors involved, what Americans and people who are in love with Western media have got to get over, they've got to get over the fact that this propaganda is trying to convince them that the United States is the leading force of good and justice and light in the world, and it is exactly the opposite. I wrote in my very first book 16 years ago, America likes to think it's Luke Skywalker. In reality, it's more like Darth Vader. It's truly the opposite. But the propaganda system is so effective. It's so good. The spin is so effective. I read headlines every day, not just of alternative news, but of mainstream news. Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, BBC, Fox News, NPR. They're all of the same group, essentially. And when you look at the confluence of those news stories, it's really remarkable how effectively they are at spinning global events, national events, in their way to promote their agenda. They're very, very good at what they do. But they have to be fought. They have to be stopped. The first thing that we have to do is simply wake up and understand that this is going on and look for alternative sources of news and information that are, pardon me, my goodness. I rushed into my office to do this interview and I'm just coughing. But we have to recognize that this is happening. And then from there we take the next steps of our education.
I agree with you, and the propaganda problem, it is a problem for everybody out there who doesn't think it is, because they're taking facts and they're telling us what they want us so we could ride behind a cause. Has not only been going on in this country for over 70 years, World War II era. You got to remember that the Nazis were brilliant at propaganda, especially when the televisions first came out. And with regards to the president, just like you said, he is only in power for up to 8 years. So why would you entrust someone like that unless, of course, you had someone who was, say, a career intelligence officer? Then let's take it one step further. If you think about it, ever since the Freedom of Information Act, was passed, that makes it that much more difficult to hide things that are supposed to be available to us in the public domain. So what better way than to stick them in private hands? With that being said, let me go ahead and take this caller here who's been calling for quite some time that I wanted to give you a chance to speak first, Mr. Dolan. Area code 951. Welcome to the show, and thank you for calling Mr. Dolan and I.
Well, thank you, Dr. J. It's an honor to speak to Mr. Dolan. I'm a recent avid sky watcher, but I do it with a full spectrum camera, which films in the UV spectrum.
Oh, wow!
And I've been getting these triangles here from like July 12th, but they're not like a TR3B or anything. They have more like a delta or a concave back end. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about if anybody else is filming in UV range, or if I'm the only one getting strange things out there.
If I may ask you, where do you live? Where are you located?
Right in the pass area of Southern California, and if you were at the recent contact in the desert,
I was.
I'm just over the hill. It's
excuse me, I'm having a coughing fit here.
That's okay.
When I was
by
at
Palm Springs.
Exactly. So you're not far from Antelope Valley, and a lot of aviation activity has been going on there for decades. A lot of very advanced stuff has been recorded and filmed there and photographed there since at least the 1980s. And in fact, I myself was I participated in a skywatch. Oh my goodness. This coughing jack, guys.
It's okay.
We have a little bit of water. I want to ask, deal with this issue. It's fascinating. Okay. I was at Joshua Tree in a month and a half ago, and there were a number of sky watches that were going on there. I participated in one. Some individuals there with some very good night vision equipment, similar, doing similar things to what you're working with. And I've done these a few times, and every single time I've done a night watch with sophisticated technology, you see things in the sky that are just impossible to see without. I would encourage anyone who's got a little bit of money to spend, if they're interested, to go get night vision binoculars or night vision equipment. You will see it's almost as if you've got Grand Central Station above you. Traffic above your head will astonish you. It astonished me the last time. There were a number of objects. I didn't necessarily see delta-shaped or even triangular objects over Joshua Tree. This is on June 5th, I believe the night was. But there were very highly unusual objects, some of them very high altitude, some of them not high altitude, that were invisible to the naked eye, that did not have standard aircraft lights attached to them, that were doing, I didn't see unusual maneuvers this time. I did on other occasions. But there's a lot going on. There are a number of researchers and sky watchers, I guess you could say, who do have good equipment, and they've made investments. There's a gentleman up in Vancouver. I met with him and spoke at length with a number of other researchers. And there is interesting stuff being recorded. People can go on YouTube and look for this, and you'll be astonished at how vivid some of these video captures are.
And I would think at this time, having said technology for over 70 years, especially if you believe about the Cape Girardeau or Cape Girardeau incident, whichever, I don't know if it's
Girardeau, yes,
Girardeau,
1941.
Exactly. Then we really go back before Roswell, so they were set to go. And let's take it one step further. What about the Battle of Los Angeles, 1942? Same thing. You have right on the cover of Los Angeles Times what looks to be an anomalous object. They're shells are exploding near it, and spotlights are on it. So you would think that after 75, 76, or 74 years, and if you want to, even further than that, it's possible. Some people talk about Black Forest in Germany, 1938, and the list goes on and on. We would have done something with that technology. So I don't doubt that a lot of these things that are aerial, we see in the skies, are not something that has been created via that technology that we've been able to use out of earthly materials and understand it to the degree we can. Obviously, I don't expect us to create things that with elements that don't even exist here that we can't, fly to a different solar system and get. But nonetheless, that's just my take on it.
I'm of a similar opinion. And just to follow up on the caller's point, I believe that we're dealing with both of these realities. In fact, it's not just me. I think a lot of aerospace insiders believe in man-made and non-man-made UFOs. This was a famous statement of the late Ben Rich, who ran Lockheed's Skunk Works for many years, in answer to a query from a colleague of his named John Andrews about UFOs. This is 1986. Asking about ours or theirs, Ben Rich said, "I'm a believer in both categories." Now, this is a quick little handwritten letter, and this is not a classified memo. I don't know how guarded Ben Rich was, but he did state his belief in both realities. The thing is, the phenomenon, in a reliable way, goes back far enough. I've encountered a number of early cases from the 1930s and prior that are just inexplicable, not even as Nazi technology, frankly. That, I talked about one case that I found that was from the Northwest Territories in 1936. Absolutely middle of nowhere type of event where an object was seen directly above an individual. Make a turn from north-south to east-west, and then instantly accelerate to the horizon. This is 1936 at a place called Aylmer Lake, which is as remote as you can get. I don't know what would be up there, but something was there.
And of course, that's defying our known laws of physics. If it's going from 0 to several thousand miles an hour, especially with drag, even though it's high in thin air, you still have drag.
According to his statement. So I think it goes very, very far back, but I agree, and I felt for a long time that there is call it a black budget contingent within the U.S. national security community, very probably that of Russia, possibly that of China, and maybe a couple of other nations. Britain probably tags along. They've had their own events. Britain's had their own. They had a very well-known crash retrieval from 1974 near Wales. So I think there are a number of countries, and then other U.S. allies, places in South America. I think the impression that I'm getting is that the U.S. basically goes in and takes over when it can of those crash retrievals. So there are a handful of nations that have their own study groups on this. But basically, the U.S. is leading the pack. They are by far the most dominant military in the world. U.S. allies do not say boo, generally speaking, without the United States signing on to it. So the only exceptions are Russia and China. The only major exceptions are those two nations. They are wild cards, but all the other nations are essentially under the U.S. control system to varying degrees, but usually to a strong degree. And that's the situation that I see. And within that, there's a great amount of technology development being done. I think the main goal for that has been to develop their own versions of flying saucer type technology and related technologies that can be weaponized based on what they've acquired and what they've learned.
951, thank you for the call. We have to move on. We have another caller. Of course, we want to
thank
get to
you.
as much
Thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, Mr. Dolan.
Thank you
My pleasure.
so much. Mike Schultz calling in from Skype. Welcome to the show. You have any questions for Mr. Dolan? He's gone too.
We lost him.
Yeah, that's okay. Now, I'm actually going to go and change the topic off disclosure and UFOs, if you don't mind, to quickly talk about false flags.
Sure.
Now, let's roll the time back to World War II. What I heard, and this is all over the internet, depending on where you read this, that when the Japanese left Japan to set sail, or to not set sail, their words, but to basically come to Pearl Harbor to bomb it, that President Roosevelt knew, and the reason was so that basically that could catapult the United States into World War II, because everybody was still bleeding dry from what had happened in World War I. And if you think about it, everything that was destroyed, for the most part, aside from the airfields and the planes, for the most part, was old technology. Old World War I battleships, some dating back to the end of the 19th century. And yet, what won the war for the most part? It was airplanes, aircraft carriers, things that really weren't at Pearl Harbor. Yes, sure, some were sunk, but new ones were built in the span of those couple years. And that's
right.
What won. That's what we took off on to take
right.
to drop off the atomic bomb. So what's your thought on that before we take the next caller?
Yeah, the Pearl Harbor issue, that's a tricky one. I mean, even if you want to get really technical, it would be hard to consider it a classic false flag just by virtue of the fact that the Japanese did in fact bomb Pearl Harbor. It wasn't a U.S. operation and blamed on the Japanese, and that would be more of a classical type of a false flag. When your intelligence group does something and is blamed on another party. So in that sense, it would not be a false flag. But in the larger sense, I think in a more accurate way to look at this, the question is, did the United States loosen the controls a little bit and allow this to happen for its own political reasons? This has been highly contentious among historians for a good 20 years since it's really been raised. And I don't really know exactly where I come down on it. It does look to me that there were elements in U.S. intelligence that knew that this attack was coming. In fact, all of the American military knew something was going to happen. The U.S. had been embargoed oil from Japan for some time already. Japan was hurting for that, and they needed a way to disable the United States long enough so they could consolidate their control over Indonesian oil. That's that much as we absolutely know. And their hope was to knock out the U.S. fleet to give them enough time so that they could then consolidate that and make themselves a little more impervious to a U.S. counterattack. So the question is, did the United States allow this to happen? It is absolutely true. U.S. public opinion was dead set against entering the Second World War. Remember, not only was action going on in Asia, but the Germans had conquered nearly all of Europe by then. And Britain was fighting on its own against the Germans. Americans, even so, did not support joining that war. The United States policy, however, was very pro-British and was doing Lend-Lease aid and was supporting the British in significant ways. So the U.S. was sort of in, and it is also true that Roosevelt and other American leaders around him wanted an excuse to get into the war. All of that is true. So the real question is, did they allow this to happen? What we can say in today's world with false flags is we might be able to say with Pearl Harbor as well, which is that, there's enough going on in the world where intelligence agencies and policing agencies know full well that if they loosen controls over a situation just enough, that things will happen. The inevitable will happen. So you could argue that certain things are allowed to happen. I'm talking about terrorist attacks in Europe as well as anything else. When these things happen, you get an excuse, very easy excuse then, to clamp down and create greater levels of totalitarianism. This is happening right now in France, for example. So the question is, did it happen at Pearl Harbor? And my opinion at the moment, I'm not through with this book that I'm working on, which is a history of false flags in the 20th and 21st century. I'm still mulling over Pearl Harbor, so I don't really know where I'll come down. There have been definite false flags before by other nations. Japan, Germany, Soviet Union primarily were doing false flags through the 1930s. And it is absolutely true after World War II, with the Cold War, that the United States took the lead in false flags far and away. No other nation even came close. Israel comes in second place. Britain probably comes in third. But the United States gets the gold medal in the false flag Olympics after World War II. And a real issue is, what is the full truth about Pearl Harbor? I think at the very least it was a convenient, and as you say, Dr. J, it was not a truly, it was more sensational than catastrophic. Same thing can be said about 9/11 for that matter. With one possible exception, and this I learned when I was doing a study of the oil industry. One thing that was not hit at Pearl Harbor was a massive reserve of petroleum supplies. The Japanese missed it. Had they hit that, it was estimated that the U.S. recovery in the Pacific could have been delayed by an extra 2 years. Had that been the case, it is totally conceivable that the Japanese would have been able to consolidate control over their oil winnings in the Dutch Indonesia. What all this means, the listener's guess is as good as mine, but it seems it was a little tricky. If they were doing this, allowing the Japanese to attack, it could have been truly disastrous for the United States. In fact, it turned out to be not as disastrous as it seemed.
And it still cost us, a couple thousand or up to 3,000 lives. That's somewhere in between that range.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Now, we have two callers waiting here, so I'm going to take them in order of waiting and calling. So let's go to 801. You're live on the air.
Hey, Dr. J, thanks for having me on. This is Nathan. And just had two questions for Mr. Dolan.
Go for it.
And the first question, first I'd like just to say thank you for so much research that you do for the community and to this world. I believe, like I always said before, cause without purpose leads to results that will not make a difference. But my first question is that with disclosure, my feeling behind this is that the government and the world really don't know the implications of disclosing this information, as far as the fact that when you get involved in a personal contact scenario, it is a huge transition for someone. My question to you is, in this question is, first of all, do you feel that the government really has the answers on how to restore the public in the fact that when this type of situation occurs, which will eventually happen, in my opinion, I don't believe that they will be able to formally address the people and how to handle this transition, because it is quite an altering experience.
Right. I'll answer that first. First of all, thanks for your kind words. I appreciate it. And the reason I do what I do is because I'm just maniacally driven to do it. I don't really know any other reason, but I'm glad that people appreciate it and that you do. Relating to the disclosure issue, I agree with you. I think what you're saying, that this is such a revolutionary topic that I have never been able to see an easy way for any government, the United States or any other, to deal with this in terms of the public reaction. Not simply public reaction in terms of panic. There's always going to be a certain amount of panic. But the infrastructure implications of the disclosure of the UFO reality. As I felt for a long time, any child seeing a zigzagging, instantly accelerating object is going to realize that it's probably not using gasoline or petroleum to move from one place to another, that it's using some other source of energy and propulsion. Whatever that source is implies an end to our petroleum era, because once this comes out, people and scientists and everyone else are going to realize that there is a way to do this, and they'll figure it out. Even if they don't pry the secret out of the black budget, they're going to find it out. And that portends a dramatic overhaul of the global petroleum-based infrastructure, which portends the end of the U.S. petrodollar system by which the United States still attempts to run the world. That system is weakening right now, and that might be significant for disclosure. But it portends revolutionary developments, to say nothing of the political blowback, which I was kind of suggesting a little earlier in this talk, about a lot of angry people who are going to will not be happy over the fact that their government has lied to them for an entire human lifetime, and will want to know what other secrets are being kept. This is something that will easily snowball out of control. For that reason, I don't believe that Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or whoever next will be president is interested genuinely in a true disclosure of this reality. What they may try to do is get out ahead of this if they feel that it is an unmanageable situation and that a leak will... I mean, WikiLeaks is out there. Other organizations are out there. And beyond freedom of information, there are groups that, whether legally or not, are grabbing digital data and they're throwing it out for the world. Right. This is the true freedom of information, is WikiLeaks. And that it could very well be an inevitability that some dark secret comes out. And I think they're trying to position themselves for it, which is why I think Hillary Clinton might have been interested in rebranding UFOs recently as UAP on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. Yes. In other words, draining the blood out of the UFOs. I mean, when people hear UFO, they think alien, Area 51, conspiracies, goofy. Right. And with UAP, not so much. It's a more value-free term. And it is very possible, I have wondered, that an effort may be underway. This is a long-term effort, though, that would rebrand, as it were, the UFO topic into UAPs, so that if this were ever to come out, the hope might be that governments could position themselves to talk about UAP and perhaps, although I don't think they'll succeed, but avoid some of the uncomfortable questions that would arise. The other question was, how much can governments even know about this? I don't know if this is your question, John, or the caller. And it's a fair question to ask, how much do the civil governments even know about this? But that's almost an irrelevancy. The black budget communities do know, and if/when the political powers are pushed to the wall and have to give up something, they will get that information from the black budget world. Undoubtedly they will, and they'll parcel out the spin and the propaganda that I think will suit them best. It will be our job, all of us listening, to hold them accountable and not to accept the propaganda spin that they're inevitably going to give us. Was there a follow-up question that you had?
Yeah, the second follow-up question to disclosure, I know you have interviewed a lot of abduction contactee or experiences.
A few, yes.
Mm-hmm. My question to you, I believe, because I'm a contactee as well, I believe the best disclosure in handling this subject is through those people that have these encounters, to be able to, and what I mean by that are the ones that have gone through the transition, understand the transformation that has taken place in their lives. I believe that is a big tool for the general consistent people that want to further expand their mind and knowledge into this field. Do you think that would be an ideal case for that?
I fundamentally agree with you. I think that, in fact, what we really need more than anything else in this field, possibly, is a much more comprehensive understanding of what experiencers are dealing with. There are some books out there. There are some websites. But I really think we need much more, frankly, so that, because, you know, the people that I've spoken to, there's a very great range of experiences that they have had, from telepathic human-looking entities that don't seem human, to gray aliens, to other varieties of of apparent beings that look very different and have different types of agendas, to beings that don't even seem to communicate through any kind of physical presence. I've spoken to people, you may be one of them, who have what they call downloads, and they're convinced that these are legitimate. The problem that we will have with this, we need all of this information out there, but the problem we'll have, as I see it, is in making sense out of all of this information, because to me, anyway, some of it seems contradictory. It's like channeled information. If I were to listen to every channeled piece of data that I get, I think I'd be a very confused person, because they haven't all agreed historically. And I'm wondering if this might be the case with people who've had experiences. Having said that, we need a very full understanding of what people are dealing with. This is a bit of self-promotion here, but I am publishing a book by a young man, Ryan Sprague, who is doing his part, and he's done interviews of a large number of people in good journalistic fashion who have had experiences either with beings or very bizarre UFO experiences. And he's, I think, done a very nice job in putting those stories together, not doing hypnotic regression, just talking to people about their experiences. And there are so many like yourself who are out there, and those voices do need to be heard. And we do need that to get a fuller understanding of what we're dealing with, for sure.
Agreed. And I've actually seen myself the contradictory statements made by these contactees slash abductees, because there are different agendas, different races, just like you said. There's just such a wide variety, but we have to get it all out there. Anyway.
Well, I'll just follow up, because I feel like we're dealing with a reality of beings that they really seem to be, in many ways, just vastly beyond what we're able to deal with. I mean, if they're able to manipulate space and time, just to give one example, how do we deal with that? If they can enter or leave our reality in ways that we just don't quite understand, it would be like our dogs trying to understand what we do when we pull out of the driveway to go to work. That was the phrase of a friend and colleague, Mike Cleland. He said this to me, and I think he's exactly right. We may be that out of league. Are we ready for open contact, and are we ready to really understand who and what they're doing? But having said that, it's very probable, in my view, that we'll never really be ready. That's not going to stop it from happening. We're going to have to deal with this the best we can.
Agreed. Nathan, thank you so much for calling. We got a few more questions and calls I want to get through before this hour runs out, because we're on schedule. But thank you so much, and thank you for putting it out there that you yourself are an experiencer. Okay, 831, welcome to the show. You're live.
Yo, Dr. J.
That's right. Who's this?
Nana. My name is Nana. And Richard, honored to talk to you. I have a question.
Thank you.
Your colleague, Dr. David Jacobs, he's recently published some work that talks about how hybrids are being now introduced into society.
You talking about Walking Amongst Us, the newest book?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm curious what you think about that. And second, I mean, you even have some people that are, they say they are hybrids themselves, speaking at some of these expos. So, I'm curious what you think about that. And second, if you do believe it or and such, do you think the government is in cahoots with it? And if so, isn't that a twist?
Yes, and yes. So thank you for this question. It's a tough one, but I've been familiar with David's work for a very long time. I think that he does, and on this matter, I think he does very good and I think accurate work in terms of interviewing and doing regressions with enough individuals that he's put this scenario together. I think he makes a reasonable case that there are, he calls them hybrids. These are hybrids who are so human that they look like you and me, but they, in his analysis, they retain the key element that makes them what they are, which is intense telepathic capability and indeed the ability to induce neurological control. So in other words, if they don't want you to move a muscle, you are not going to move a muscle, this type of thing. In my own journeys in this field, I've spoken to a few people who've given me encounter cases that they've had that make me think that they've encountered hybrids, that they've encountered human individuals with intense, off-the-charts, bizarre telepathic capabilities who don't seem to be part of our civilization. So I am inclined to think that this is at least possible. There are other reasons to speculate that these beings who would, in theory, be walking among us have their own connections within the structures of power. Look, I want to be the first to say that I don't know for sure this is so. But it seems logical to me. If I were one of them, I would certainly want to have my hooks into the power structure of planet Earth, knowing the trajectory that we as a civilization are on. We're about to leap into their world. We're a generation or less away from super advanced artificial intelligence, super advanced nanotech, quantum computing, advanced organic 3D printing, complete mastery of DNA. We are about to reinvent ourselves, not just as a civilization, but as a species. They have to know this. They have to know that as such, we might be a bit of a handful to manage. And they might very well want to get their hooks into the power structure, financial and political. There have also been statements from, let's go to remote viewing. So there was a legendary great remote viewer back in the 70s named Pat Price. He was murdered in 1975. Pat Price was possibly the greatest of all of the remote viewers back in the 70s, working with the CIA and U.S. intelligence. He had off-the-charts abilities, and on one occasion, Pat Price did his own remote viewing and told us to Hal Puthoff, who I know, and said, yes, actually, if you want to know, there are 5 alien bases that I remote viewed. One was in the Pyrenees, one was at Mount Hayes, Alaska, one was in Zimbabwe, one was in western Australia. So I think that was 4. And he stated the one at Mount Hayes, Alaska was specifically being protected by elements within the U.S. government so that no one would go to it. That was something he said 41 years ago. Is it true? Well, coming from Pat Price, probably the greatest remote viewer ever that I am aware of, I would not dismiss such things, not at all. There are other reasons to speculate that this is the case. If I had the job of doing counterintelligence on behalf of the human race, it's definitely something I would be looking at and wondering about. And it does complicate things. I mean, absolutely it does, because then you wonder who's running the show here. If we have disclosure, who's doing the disclosing? Are we completely being managed by all sides, we the people? And I don't have an answer to that.
Are we puppets? Exactly. I think that's a fantastic concept. 831 caller, thank you so much. Let me move through some of these other written questions from people. I do apologize for rushing you off. It's just that we are really cutting it close to time, but thank you for calling. Okay, I'm going to merge. We have 3 questions here that I'm choosing to ask from the people that are literally across the pond, and one of them here in the States. I'm going to merge this 2 because one is more complete, but I want to acknowledge the other one. So basically, Paula from Valencia, Spain, thank you for being up so early in the morning listening, as well as Mark S., Scranton, Pennsylvania. Paula asks, is 9/11 a false flag? And let me continue that with Mark S.'s question. Is 9/11 a false flag used to get us into Iraq?
Yes and yes. 9/11 served multiple purposes. So, yes, I will argue, and I absolutely, that it was a false flag. This was engineered for 2 specific general purposes. One was domestic control, and one is international empire. The domestic control, you can really see, came, I think, very crystal clear just a year and a half earlier in the major protests, you might even say riots, that took place in Seattle in late 1999, when the World Trade Organization had a conference there. The people of Seattle organized a protest that was so successful, 40,000 or more people at a minimum were there, and they literally were able to prevent those proceedings from going for several days. They were able to shut that city down. This is back in the days in the United States when people believed they still had rights. This type of action, which was directly the result of globalization, the loss of jobs, the loss of hope, the loss of a future, was not going to stop. Globalization was obviously going to continue, and I firmly believe, I don't have a document to prove this, but I believe that the decision had to be made at the top that this was not going to happen anymore. There had to be a reason to have the hammer come down on people to let them know in no uncertain terms that there was now a national security apparatus that was going to be monitoring, surveilling, that would have your face in a database anytime you do a protest, which is now the case, that would monitor you 24/7. So that was one reason that we had 9/11. And now ever since, people duck their head. You have an entire generation of people that have grown up post 9/11 now, and all they know is government surveillance. So it's changed the culture. The other reason, though, for 9/11, yes, there was $30 trillion worth of oil under the ground in Iraq. In the bad old days of Saddam Hussein, yes, Saddam and his evil sons lived like emperors. They did, off that oil. But that oil also paid for the entire Iraq infrastructure, hospitals, schools, roads, everything else. Those people had a good life in Iraq. Not anymore. By 2007, under George W. Bush, all of those oil fields were sold off to multinationals, most of which were not even American multinationals, for the record, but they were sold off. That was the point all along. And also Afghanistan, let's not forget, where trillions of dollars worth of mineral wealth is under the ground there. And there's a huge, huge effort to extract that as well. So you need a pretext to go in. 9/11 obviously served as that pretext, as weak as it was, because frankly, even officially speaking, there's nothing connecting Saddam Hussein to 9/11. But if you listen to the propaganda under the Bush administration back in those days, they were explicitly trying to link Saddam to 9/11, and at various times they attempted to do that. And then failing that, they invented the fictitious charade of weapons of mass destruction. Right. So, but yes, 9/11 absolutely is the centerpiece of our world today. It is the false flag that is still the most important one. There have been false flags since 9/11. There were false flags before 9/11. But 9/11 is the world-changing false flag that transformed the United States. It really allowed, how debutantes have their coming out party. 9/11 was the coming out party of the national security state. This apparatus had been developing for decades before 9/11, but after 9/11, it was essentially introduced to the world as this new entity, and that's what we've been living in officially ever since.
Here's another question from across the pond that seems proper at the time, even though it was written, several minutes ago. I'd say about closer to 10 minutes ago. This comes from Ben in I hate to mispronounce the cities. It's Swansea, Wales. Yeah, it says, was Osama, with a U, bin Laden, dead before 9/11 as a former U.S. Army colonel who taught at the U.S. Army JFK School of Warfare PSYOPs Division said?
I don't know. There's a lot of reason to think bin Laden was dead before the U.S. supposedly killed him in Pakistan a number of years ago. I spoke to a soldier who was at Tora Bora in, was it 2001, I guess, when they were going after bin Laden. He was supposedly in a cave there. This soldier said to me point blank, he said, there's no way in hell anyone could have gotten out of that cave alive. He said, we blasted the hell out of it. It was a done deal. No one could have gotten out. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, bin Laden, we all know the story. This man was trained and funded by the CIA and by U.S. intelligence. Going back to the 1980s, there's a famous picture of him with Zbigniew Brzezinski back when they were with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. He was CIA all the way. When that operation in Afghanistan ended, all or nearly many of those Islamists went to do work for the U.S. elsewhere, including the former Yugoslavia, and now they've ended up in Syria. They ended up in Libya a number of years ago. So too with bin Laden. He was always a company man. The question is, what happened to him around 2001? There's a lot of reason to think the true story of bin Laden is very, very sketchy. We all know that there were alleged photographs of bin Laden that appeared after 9/11 that were not Osama bin Laden. There were speeches that bin Laden made during the Bush years in particular that were timed so perfectly to coincide with George Bush's political agenda, including his re-election in 2004 against John Kerry. Bin Laden made a statement just before that election that really tipped the scale in favor of George Bush, I think. So there's a lot going on. I don't know if we're ever really going to know the full truth. I will say that there's enough to be very suspicious of, including the fact that his body was never shown after his murder in Pakistan.
Unlike Uday and Hussein, or Saddam's kids.
Saddam, yes, son.
When they were killed, both of them, they were laid out for all the media to see.
Right.
And Osama bin Laden, was taken off a ship, no picture taken, and they said it was because they didn't want a monument for martyrdom. But I think it's...
And also, they later said because they actually obliterated his body with bullets so badly.
But that doesn't make sense if he had a double tap, one to the chest, one to the head. But you're absolutely right. And I agree with you. He was company because when the Soviets were fighting Afghanistan in the 80s, he was leading the Mujahideen. So we were supplying them
He was
weapons.
key. He was a key player,
Yes. Nonetheless, unfortunately, we are so close to the end of the hour, so I'm actually going to, before we promote your stuff, I want to give you a moment to say a final statement to everybody out there, believers, skeptics, people on the fence, on every topic, and of course, this goes globally because this is an international show.
Well, the key is, now in this last hour, we have really been dishing it out, haven't we? And we've talked about a lot of very controversial subjects. During this hour, I haven't had the opportunity, as I often like to try to meticulously go through the factual foundations for what I believe. But I guess I'll just say that that there is a great deal of research on every of the statements that I've made, and I try to be careful. Well, I would encourage everyone out there to recognize, if you haven't already, that we're in a kind of a revolutionary political situation globally in which there is an elite, financial, political elite that is doing everything possible to transform this world quietly in their own favor. And toward that end, they are subjecting us to a constant barrage of propaganda, including false flags. It is a mind job beyond anything that we've ever experienced as human beings ever in our past, and it's going on right now. Part of the hidden reality is indeed, as I've studied for over 20 years, the UFO phenomenon. There are still many, many great mysteries about what UFOs represent. I don't know if we'll ever truly get it because I am of the opinion that we are dealing with an intelligence that's operating on orders of magnitude beyond. Having said that, there's a great deal that we can learn. Ultimately, what we need is a kind of political rectification. That is, we need a formal political acknowledgement that this stuff is going on because if for no other reason, if the government doesn't belong to you, then who does it belong to?
That's right.
The government is corrupt, they're criminal, they've run away. All of that is true. It's easy for us to throw up our hands and say, it doesn't matter what the government thinks, we'll do our own thing. But it does matter because if you want to live in a society in which government is responsible to you, we've got to hold it accountable by whatever means we need to do. And that means within the system, or that means working beyond the system, forcing change. This is what people have done throughout human history. They have reform, they have revolution, reform, revolution. It just keeps going. No different in our own era. We need to find a way to get political truth out on the table so that we can evolve to wherever it is we need to go. We can't do it without truth.
Agreed. And I think a revolution is very much underway. And on top of that, like you said, we have to hold the politicians accountable. And I always say this to everybody, if we're so unhappy, let's vote everybody out and sort of start over. Instead of having these career politicians over and over again who are literally chipping away at our Constitution daily, then something needs to be done. But nonetheless, RichardDolanPress.com. I know you have a lot of your books. Don't forget, everybody, that you can also see his books, direct links to his website from our website, which is drjradiolive.com. Richard, let's talk about your show, your books, your publishing company, and anything else you'd like to say, any future appearances in lectures that you have coming up. Nope.
Sure. Well, I keep myself very busy, that's for sure. I do a lot of travel. I do public speaking quite a bit these days. I do have a publishing company, and I've got a couple of new books from other authors in the wings. I referred to one of them by Ryan Sprague. There's a few others that are. I just published one on Russia's USO history. That is the history of Russia's interaction with unidentified submersible objects. That's on my site, Paul Stonehill and Philip Mantle. Very interesting book. I myself am working on my false flag book. I don't have a date for when it will be done, but I'm working on it. I want it to be done as soon as I can get it done at a high level. I will continue to do my UFO research. I've got a third volume of the National Security State series that will be following after the false flag book. And, I'll just keep doing this until I can't do anything anymore. I love what I do. I feel like I've gotten lucky in my life in that I found this fire. It's a fire that burns inside me. That's really the truth. And it consumes me, and I just want to get answers to certain questions that I ask. I believe in the history of human freedom. I believe in the future of human freedom as well. And I think that you can't have freedom without truth. And so to whatever limited, and it's truly limited efforts and accomplishments that I have, I just want to be able to move that ball forward and get us to where I feel we really need to be, which is in a more free and a more truthful society.
Agreed, and you are very, very well respected for that, all around amongst the community, and of course with listeners and those who see you in person. Richard, if I might ask if you could please hold over till we are off air. First of all, make sure everybody out there go to richarddolanpress.com. Again, you'll see the link on drjradiolive.com. That is the only phrase you need to remember. DRJ Radio Live. That is the name of our .com, our website. That is the name of where YouTube, where we post our archives once they've made their way around the world on the various networks. Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Facebook, Google+, Gmail, Pinterest, Slack, you name it. It's all the same account, Dr. J Radio Live. I also want to thank Ira Robinson and Michael Vara from Late Night in the Middens for also carrying our show. Don't forget Angel Espino from PSN Radio for also carrying the show. And of course, across the Atlantic Pond in the United Kingdom, where a lot of these questions are originating because of JC, who runs the Deprogram Radio Network. I must thank him very much for also carrying the show. Not to mention those of you listening on terrestrial radio. Thank you very much. So far, in this last year, since we've had all these affiliates, I've seen and we've gotten calls as well as questions from 42 different countries. Now that I'm very happy to say. Remember, everybody, disclosure is in your hands. Everybody out there, whatever you can contribute to getting to the truth, please do it. I used to be a passive researcher until 5 years ago. I said, you know what? Let's do something about this, and this is where I came about. So first, I want to thank, of course, my guest, Richard Dolan. It's always a pleasure to have him on. Hopefully, he will come back sooner rather than waiting a year, and especially to get more onto the other stuff. I also want to thank, of course, my team. There's so many people. Johnny couldn't join us tonight from London because he got tied up somewhere and traffic nonetheless. So nonetheless, I still want to thank him, of course, with Tom and all these other people unsaid. But the most important people I want to thank are you, the listener. And tomorrow, join us for the legendary John Lear, where, of course, you can ask whatever you want. He is known as the godfather of conspiracies, going back to S4 and Bob Lazar and that whole thing. A lot of the things he says now are not what he used to say, but still, it's always good fun, and it's an interactive experience for you, the listener. With that being said, this is Dr. J, and because of the Democratic National Convention, I will let you hear somebody right before we go out. And now I am officially signing off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Uri Geller, and guess what? You're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
This is Mike Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.